My name's Dr. Karen O'Donnell, and along with my colleague Dr. Katie Cross from the University of Aberdeen, we have co-edited a new volume on Feminist Trauma Theologies, Body, Scripture and Church in Critical Perspective. It's a brilliant collection of essays looking at the intersection of feminism and trauma research from a theological perspective. We've got essays on methods and methodologies in trauma theologies, sections on violence against women, Christian communities, and the experience of post-traumatic remaking. So Katie and I came to work on this book together out of a conversation that we had at SST, which is the Society for the Study of Theology. We'd never met before, and SST always kicks off with the women's reception, which sounds a little bit weird, but actually is often my favourite bit of the conference. And I bumped into her. She was wearing a name badge, and I vaguely knew who she was, and she vaguely knew who I was, and we got chatting, and we said, oh, we should have a drink together in the bar. So this book kind of came about by Katie and I having a few glasses of wine, deciding that we were really both interested in trauma theology. There weren't that many UK projects on trauma, so there was quite a lot of stuff coming out of the US, but there wasn't that much coming out of the UK. And we spent probably half an hour just kind of fangirling over all these amazing women that were writing in trauma theology. And we were saying, well, it's one of the few fields in Christian theology that's dominated by female voices, like outside of feminist theology, obviously. There are just loads of women doing it. And then we started talking about the intersection, the relationship between feminism and trauma. And that's where the book was born. We went away, both of us kind of not working on a project at that particular time and thinking we were ready to do something. And so that was in the April, and we had started lining up contributors by the summer. So it happened quite quickly. But also we didn't know each other and then became really great friends through doing it. So it's been like a really personal kind of privilege to work with Katie. I wish she was here today to talk to you as well. Trauma theology is any theological work that's seeking to take our contemporary and developing understanding of trauma seriously. And so I think it's a real variety of things. So you might find trauma theologians who are wrestling with biblical texts that talk about the experience of trauma or how one functions after trauma. And there's quite a lot of biblical studies work happening in that field. You might find more pastoral texts, which are people thinking about how do we care for spiritually, how do we care for people who've experienced trauma and are in the process of remaking themselves after trauma. Katie and I are working from kind of constructive and practical approaches. So my work particularly is looking at the problems that Christian theology can cause for people who've experienced trauma. So some of our doctrines, like doctrines of forgiveness and reconciliation, are really problematic for people who are trauma survivors. And I'm really keen to think about ways in which trauma survivors can be taken seriously, and their experience can really be taken into account in the theological work that I'm doing. So I think it's a whole variety of things, biblical, pastoral, practical, what we might have traditionally called kind of systematic theologies. Lots of people coming at theological thinking from the perspective of saying what we understand now about trauma is really important, and we need to take that seriously as we think about the theological work that we're doing. We really hope that this book will provoke some powerful conversations and that it will give a wide range of people access into the conversations about trauma and theology that are happening from a feminist perspective.